Hello, and welcome back to another pen talk. Thanks for tuning in. And this is just a little side road trip. This is microphone test number 3, so I have the lapel mic but not connected to me, so we'll see how it works. I got a package in the mail today. Since it was sent US PS first class, I got an alert as it was put in the mailbox, so that was very nice. And as you can see, the return address, those of you that follow fine writing instruments on Instagram, well, that should be familiar to you. Let's see what's in the package. We have a nicely wrapped pen box. We have a notepad, and we have a personal note from Jowo Stationery. Very nice note. I tried to visit the store, but I didn't make it into the city, so they're very happy with my purchase, and I just think it's a nice touch. It's always a shame to ruin a very nice packaging job, so we'll open it up carefully. And they certainly did a very nice job in wrapping the package. And we'll see a white box. No labeling. There we go. Yes, it's a Golden Armour with a broad nib. I stick with broads. You can always make them into something smaller, but you can't take an extra fine and turn it into a broad. So let's see what we got here. A box that might be familiar to some, but certainly not for me. I did get the Saturn. Pops open, and we see the pen. Nicely presented. We have a little booklet. And it talks about the barrel made of a crack-proof acrylic resin. I'm certainly not going to test that theory out. So it talks about using the pen as an eyedropper. Do not twist the cap too tightly while covering. That's a very nice thing to do. And let's take a look at the pen. In addition to sound, the other thing that I try to do is have the video quality be as high as possible. So I just turned on some extra LED lights just so we can revel in the detail of this pen. It's always good to adjust them. And the detail is nice. I mean, it has a very substantial weight. Obviously, we'll give you the exact weight when we get to that point. But it's just nicely done, tastefully done. You have your 2 roll stops there on the cap, and that unbreakable acrylic barrel there in the middle, and a pseudo-blind cap at the other end. You know, the cap just unturns. 1, 2, about 2.5, and we notice a really exquisite section here, which is nice. That metal is not really slippery, and I love this logoed Jowo nib. You can see the feet on the back, one of the trademarks to identify a Jowo nib, and also this engraving that they generally have. And there's a spot there where they allow, you know, the vendors that buy their nibs to put a logo in there, probably laser engraved. And there's a B for broad. You know, the converter in there is loose, but you would have to unscrew this anyways. Takes a fair number of turns, which is what you would want if you wanted to eyedropper it. And of course, these fine threads, and you have an O-ring at the end. So that comes out. I probably don't plan on using the converter. I will eyedropper this one. I didn't do that with the Saturn one, but, you know, I'm ready to commit a large amount of ink to this pen. So that's the unboxing. Hopefully this visual of the pen excites you. It does me. It's something unique and something good, and it appears that most of the weight is in the cap. So we're going to do our usual cleaning and flushing and then decide what ink to put in and see how this broad Jowo nib performs in this pen. So we're going to let the engineer take a look at the pen. So one of the first things I noticed is this is threaded and screwed into that cap and probably glued. I don't know whether the camera's going to pick it up, but you can see a little bit of color there from the glue. And the barrel is definitely consistently clear. You can see as I turn it around against this grid paper, it's nicely done. Let's see if this extends into the cap, and it does. So there's no end plug to that acrylic, at least it doesn't appear to be. I've read that the metal has been treated so the ink won't affect it. Let's take a look inside the cap. There's a very nice cap liner, extends all the way. So that hopefully will make a good seal against that section. You can see a lip in there. No other breaks in that cap, so that liner should do a good job. So I've chosen this ink. I've used it in other pens. I think it should really work good with the broad nib. And I have a decent amount left. I'm surprised considering how many pens I filled up with this ink. So how do you fill the pen? Well, I have this syringe filled with 5 milliliters of gold Antigua, and we're going to fill the barrel up to see how much ink goes into the barrel. My record is 5 milliliters on the Moonman C1. I think that's as full as I'm going to get it. And you notice I have tape now on them so they don't wear off. So it's looks like 2.5 milliliters. So the C1 is still the winner. We're going to screw that section in, which I put on some silicone grease. I always do that. And see how this pen writes. These are my two Fine Writing International pens. The Jupiter one I got a few months ago, and I was very happy with the pen. It had a black fine nib in it, a Jowo nib, like the broad in the golden armor. And I just love the design, and Jupiter, it's a planet. It's the biggest planet in the solar system. So, and this is on its second or third inking, so it's just been a nice, reliable writer. So that's one reason why I sprang for this, which is like the top of the line one. So one of the things that took me by surprise, and it shouldn't have, but the cap is pretty strongly spring-loaded. So if you just try to screw the pen in without doing anything, you have to push in to get it to engage those threads. And in the beginning, it took a fair amount of pressure to push it in. But the inner cap, and the cap is actually in two pieces, that inner piece is actually spring-loaded and moves quite a bit, as you can see against my thumb there. So it's a nice bit of engineering. You may notice that it doesn't have that original gold broad Jowo nib. It has a Franklin Christoph 1.1. And we're going to talk about that. When I originally inked up this pen, after flushing and doing everything that I normally do, it had trouble writing, and I thought maybe I'd left a little bit too much water in it. I tried to dry it out. I tried to do a whole bunch of stuff that I normally do, and it would write a little bit, it would skip, it would stop. I flossed the nib. I just did everything. I did a little smoothing. But I figured that sometimes you get an ink nib combination, it doesn't work. So this pen has always written consistently well. So I put the broad nib from the Golden Armor into the Jupiter pen, and guess what? It wrote great. So we're going to show the writing of these two nibs, and then I'm going to do a swap and put the original broad back into the Golden Armor and see if it'll work okay. I also tried a number of different Franklin Christoph nibs. I had a ground broad into an italic. And they didn't write as well as I expected them to write, but then that was a little bit of a dry nib to begin with. So it appears that the ink in the Golden Amour runs a little bit on the dry side. When I flushed it, it seemed to have great flow, so I expected it to be a little wetter than it turned out to be. I'll do a quick comparison with the Golden Amour. Here's a Kara's Customs ink. Here's a Namisu Nova. And Pen BBS 355. I threw it in there because that like equilibrates to like a kind of like an M800 size. So just to put things in perspective, that's obviously the longer pen. These are all pretty weighty, with Golden Amour being the heaviest. Here they are uncapped. I wouldn't post these pens, but you know, maybe the 355 is the most postable of this group. But the interesting thing is there's 4 completely different designs on sections. This is the more classic design, followed by the 355, then the Golden Amour, and then the Nova, which is just, this is a straight line one. So is this, but this one's a little bit narrower. This has that nice big step, and so does the ink, where this one doesn't, and this one doesn't either. But they both have a decent sized nibs, and the nibs look good. The smallest one is on the ink, and that's a titanium Bach nib, Jowo. I think this is Bach 2, yep. And of course the Pen BBS is its own entity. So a lot of people fixate on capping and uncapping. So let's just take this through the paces. That's 1 turn. That's 2 turns. 2.5. Almost 3 turns. So 2 3/4. So that's a fair number of turns to take off the cap. And to cap it, like I mentioned, you really have to push it in to engage those threads and then turn it. And of course it's that same 2 3/4 turns to get it. I mean, it's very secure. With that liner the way it is, you're not going to have any ink drying issues. And with that plastic liner, you can post a pen, but that cap is just really, really heavy. I mean, you can see how it wants to move up when you try to write with it. So, and it's not that secure, but it's a decent balance, but not perfect with it unposted. So one of the fun things about eyedroppers is watching the ink slosh around. I mean, that's a full fill. I made a miscalculation. It actually took over 3 milliliters of ink when I filled it up from the syringe. So it's a pretty good fill. And I've been writing with this quite a bit with some nibs that are now wet, and there's a lot of ink left. So this is the ink that I inked up the Jupiter pen with. And in the fine nib it was okay, but the broad nib does a lot. And here's the card for the Robert Oster Rot, which is in the dark red family. You know, it's an interesting ink, certainly not a color I have in any of my other bottles. The Gold Antigua card got a little bit wet, but I think you can get an idea of that ink color. It's certainly in the brown family. I mean, this works extremely well. I've never seen any shading in this ink, but I can get some decent shading with this nib and this pen with this ink, so kudos. The nib is not soft, it's pretty hard and stiff, but it is very smooth. I mean, no pressure, it writes extremely well. It's consistent, so this is what I expected from the Golden Amour, but I didn't get to see that when I had this nib in that pen. Let's see how the 1.1 works in the Golden Amour. You get natural line variation because of this stub, and it's sensitive to angles, so I'm writing over the camera, so it's hard to keep it at the right angle, but this nib has worked well since I first put it in this pen. I wouldn't still say it's the wettest pen. I may try to open up the feed a little bit, but this is, you know, the feed that was in the Franklin Christoph. So I'm going to say it's probably as good as it's going to get. So for some reason, Robert Oster Gold Antigua is not a ink I would use with a Jowo feed and nib. I think it's the one conclusion I've come to after all of my back and forth investigations. So we're going to swap nibs around and put them in their original pens just to get an idea of how they make the writing different. The original broad nib is back into the golden armor. It does look good in this pen. We're going to do a little side by side. So this is now the broad Jowo back in its original pen, and it's writing like I wanted it to write. So I did an adventure. It took me a number of days, longer than I wanted to finally get this pen where I now really enjoy it, and I'm going to go through that ink that's in the barrel. The original black extra fine Jowo nib is back in the Jupiter pen, and let's see how it compared to the broad one that was in there before. As we expected, it's not as wet and it's not as smooth. The extra fine, you're going to get more feedback no matter what you do to the nib because it's just a very small contact area, and you need a little bit of pressure to get that ink to flow, so therefore you're going to feel it. Where on that broad nib you wouldn't. And as we zoom in a little bit, you know, the extra fine doesn't really give you much shading, not as much as the broad nib did. So like I said, I have a new appreciation for this ink from Robert Oster after playing around with it in a different nib. And we do a close-up of the broad compared to the 1.1, and I do like the broad a little bit better than the 1.1. It's just not as sensitive to angle, more consistent writer, and it feels better on the paper than the 1.1 did. So now we're coming up to that all-important factor, is where will I rate this pen? Well, now that I have the original broad nib back in it and it's working as I expected, I'm going to give the pen a 9.3. One check for the nib and one check for the unique design. Where to me this pen doesn't hit it out of the ballpark is the weight distribution. It doesn't feel as comfortable to me as I kind of liked it to do or expected it to do. I mean, about half the weights in the cap will give you those weights. We'll give you those section dimensions so you can compare them to other pens. I mean, it's the right size section, a little on the short side, but you can hold it. Those threads you don't feel. There's just a minor step up you don't feel. I don't know. I just had maybe my expectations on the pen were higher, but if I was to do this over again, I would buy two Planet pens and leave this one alone. But if you like metal pens, if you like some interesting designs, then and you like a large ink capacity, then this pen would work for you. So we've reached the end of this video now, so thank you for watching. May you have any great writing experiences and enjoy putting ink on paper, and just realize occasionally a pen may not perform exactly like you want it to or expect it to, but hopefully with a little bit of patience and some minor amount of attention, you can get a fountain pen to do what you want it to do. So that's my learning experience from this pen. So put put some ink on paper. Enjoy seeing how they look. So we've reached the end of this video. We're going to say bye for now until the next video. And now this pen is an excellent writer. I really like it, and I don't think that this ink is contributing to the issues, but I'm glad they're gone. I usually don't do PSs on my videos, but as I watched the video, I remembered that I didn't do anything about this notebook that they sent with the pen. So as you may know, I'm not a notebook guy. I enjoy notebooks. I have a number of them. Fabriano Equipoise is one of my favorites. I also like Maruman. They're a good price, they're good value, which is what I like. And I've done a few notebook reviews, but they've been basically, wow, this is a great deal. So I decided I would try some fountain pens on this paper. I did a variety. Obviously, the one that the video was based on, which is the Golden Armour with the broad nib, and it stopped writing. As you can see, this is after I've done my video. So the challenge with this is somehow the feed just empties out if you keep the pen nib up, which is the basic way that you would store a pen. You put it upside down for a minute and it writes okay. I had to write with vintage. Yeah, there's a little bit of feathering. The paper feels good in the hand, but it's not coated enough to really, I think, be good with fountain pens. I mean, the inks come out nice. The colors are nice. I'm using this Standish blue because it's a permanent blue to address some of my political postcards that I'm sending out. But the real test is when you turn it over to the other side, and to me there's more bleed through than I'd be comfortable with. I mean, the paper feels thick enough to avoid bleed through. You could write on both sides, but not something I would do. Here's how this notebook is sold on Yoshida. This is one form of it with these two columns. I assume it's some type of journaling, not something that I do. So that's the look at this small pocket notebook. I like the thick cardboard that's on the outside. You know, it's, I think it's stitched. Yeah, it's a stitched construction. So that's nice. It lays flat. But the paper to me is not as fountain pen friendly as I like. That's my notebook review. This is now the official end of the video.